Well, good morning, everybody. And this morning, my talk is entitled, "What is Unity? What is Unity?" And I chose this talk because after service today, we are going to have a new membership meeting and welcome new members, which is very, very exciting for our community. As you know, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore are the co-founders of Unity. And Charles described unity as a positive, practical Christianity. Positive and practical Christianity. But it looks quite different in some ways than traditional Christianity. And to me, that's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of it. And so, in my own words, I would say that unity is a movement back towards the most essential teachings of Jesus. And I feel in traditional Christianity, in many cases, it views humans as separate from God, as never quite able to reach the divine stature. Whereas in unity, we view humanity as offspring of God, as God's in embryo, really, with Jesus as the great example for us, in that we are all potentially Christs. We are all potential Christ. We are all potential divine expressions of the One. The Unity movement, which began back in 1891. It was a movement that celebrated the truth of us as originally good, and made in the image of the divine, versus being originally sinful. And I think what people find so refreshing when they walk into a Unity Center is that we place our attention on the goodness and on the love that we are, and not on the sinfulness or the guilt or the shame. You know, and people that find their way to unity, a lot of times they're healing from that old paradigm. You know, I love asking people how they found unity and what their first experience was like. You know, many people share that they cried in their first service that they attended, and that they felt like they had found their spiritual home, that they had found a place that deeply resonated with their heart, with their soul. I remember my first experience at Living Enrichment. It was at Living Enrichment Center, which was a place in Portland, Oregon. I was living up at Brighton Bush Hot Springs in Oregon. And Living Enrichment Center was founded by Reverend Mary Morrissey. You may have heard of her. She's a powerful speaker and teacher and writer. But Mary had started a little Unity study group in her living room, kind of like our wonderful Karen Martin started this Unity at the Lake, in her living room in Tahoe. But Mary started this Living Enrichment Center in her living room, and pretty quickly it outgrew her living room. And by the time she invited me to come to Living Enrichment Center, it had grown so big that they were meeting, of all places, in a movie theater. They were renting a movie theater. And I'll never forget walking in and the juxtaposition of this huge crowd of loving people and the sacred energy of the place, and also the very strong smell of popcorn. And there were about 1,000 people, I think, on that first Sunday, my first Unity New Thought church experience, about 1,000 people. And I remember that during the service, Mary and I created a meditation together. I sang a song that I had written called "We're Dancing in the God That We Are." Dancing in the God that we are. And I'd sing a verse, and then Mary would guide meditation while I kept playing piano. She would expound on the verse I sang, then I'd sing another verse, and she'd expound on that. And I just remember that we went so deep. We went so deep into this meditative experience, and I was looking out at this sea of faces in the audience, and I was singing, "We're dancing in the God that we are," and I was seeing that we are God. This body of humanity is God, and we are dancing in the God that we are, in the one God and the many, many expressions and the many forms. And that experience had a dramatic effect on me and on my life. And for 25 years after that first experience, I realized, okay, this is where I want to be. This is where I want to share music. I was writing a lot of sacred music at the time, and so I started touring all over the country and singing at hundreds and hundreds of Unity churches, New Thought churches, for the next 25 years. I was really delighted that we brought Reverend Jim Gaither here last Sunday. I hope you all got to see him. He has a doctorate in theology. He's been a teacher for Unity Worldwide Ministries for many, many years. And he teaches the C classes for Unity, and he teaches the history of Unity, which was my favorite C class I took. But when I took his class, I was really fascinated when he described what inspired Charles Fillmore, where Charles gathered his inspiration from. Charles was drawn to the philosophers of the Transcendental Movement, which the Transcendental Movement was back in the early 1800s, 1820s, 1830s. And Myrtle Fillmore was drawn to, she was drawn more to metaphysical teachings on healing and healing practices. And so these various influences coalesced into the Unity movement over the course of about 20 years and became a body of spiritual teachings that they called practical Christianity. Practical Christianity. And two of the most important influences on Charles were Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau, and they were both transcendentalists. And they believed in the inherent goodness of people and nature. They saw divine experience inherent in everyday living, in everyday life. And you can see their influence on Unity's core principle, which is that we are inherently good. We are inherently good. Ralph Waldo Emerson is particularly dear to my heart because he finds the divine in the natural world, very much as I do. Let me read you a quote. I love this quote from his essay, Nature. He wrote, "In the woods, we return to reason and faith. There, I feel that nothing can befall me in life, no disgrace, no calamity, which nature cannot repair. Standing on the bare ground, my head bathed by the blithe air and uplifted into infinite space, all mean egotism vanishes. I become transparent. I am nothing. I see all. The currents of the universal being circulate through me. I am part and parcel of God." I love that writing. I love especially the last two lines. The currents of the universal being circulate through me. I am part and parcel of God. You know, so in Emerson, you can feel that he's having this direct experience of God within, and he's feeling his oneness with nature. You know, he's feeling, you know, no separation, right? He's feeling that, you know, inherent divinity in himself and in all of nature. And so, you know, this philosophy of the time when Charles was being inspired, it was fresh, it was alive, it was felt deeply, and it was really quite the opposite of, you know, some of the traditional church settings that were more rote and repetitive and mechanical, right? It had life, and that's the thing, is our spirituality, it has to be a living experience. It has to be alive in us. Another transcendentalist, Henry David Thoreau, revered the Bhagavad Gita, which is Hinduism's most beloved scripture. And Thoreau was a big influence on Charles Fillmore. Thoreau wrote, "In the morning I bathe my intellect in the stupendous philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita, in comparison with which our modern world and its literature seem puny and trivial." So we find that, you know, Fillmore was influenced in many ways by Hinduism. He was especially inspired by Swami Vivekananda at the first Parliament of World Religions in 1893. Fillmore read and published Vivekananda's teachings in the early Unity publications. And it's interesting, the Fillmores adopted a vegetarian diet, and they also believed in reincarnation, which to me reflects a strong influence of Hinduism. And, on a personal note, I think it's part of why I resonate with this philosophy so deeply, because the most important teachers in my life are from the yogic tradition, the Hindu and yogic tradition. So when you talk to people who found their way to unity, you often hear a similar story. People say they didn't resonate, they tried a number of other, traditions, churches maybe, and they didn't resonate with the way that they felt traditional Christianity kept God separate, that, humans were always going to be less than or be sinful. And so it was the positive aspect of being innately good instead of sinful that made people's hearts leap, when they heard it, to be reminded that God is actively present within everyone as the indwelling presence. That's powerful to hear, especially the first time you hear it, if you haven't heard it. And, the divine in us, it resonates, it responds to that because it knows the truth of it. So a big difference in unity from traditional Christianity is the Fillmore's view that Jesus is the great example for us, not the great exception, but something we can become. Charles Fillmore wrote, "The secular world has been taught that Jesus was so superior to the mortal man that he can be thought of only as a god. This removes him from us. It removes him from us all as a man whose character we may emulate and as an example of what we may become, and it places his attainments far beyond human possibilities." Fillmore considered Jesus to be human at birth, someone who lived his life to transform himself and realize the indwelling presence. Fillmore wrote that Jesus resolutely went to work to weed out his weaknesses and build them up with the fullness of the omnipotent God, the omnipotent God. I love that. I believe that we need a great example of who and what we can become. We need to know that that is possible for us. Not only possible, but that is our destiny. That is our divine inheritance, birthright, and destiny. So, we're here to evolve. And the Fillmore saw Jesus as the blueprint for the fully awakened human. And what else I love about the unity philosophy is it doesn't ask us to believe, in these truth teachings with blind faith. This philosophy invites you to see for yourself, to explore the principles they put forth, apply the truth teachings, and discover for yourself what is true. I think there's a huge difference between blind faith, believing something because a spiritual teacher, told us to, and hearing something that resonates in our heart and our soul and applying that and discovering for ourselves that, yes, this is my direct experience. This is what I know in my bones to be true. The teachings on truth that Jesus offered came from his direct experience. And then what we've seen, since the time of Jesus, over 2,000 years, is those teachings being interpreted and reinterpreted by people who weren't in the state that he was in, that weren't in that Christ consciousness, right? So I believe that Charles Fillmore's interpretation, he wrote the Metaphysical Dictionary, kind of took a lot of terms and reinterpreted them and really looked deeply and examined them. His view, I think, brings a lot of wise insight to what's been lost in translation, about healing and about the power of using our mind to create reality and bring about healing. And, in my opinion, we should listen to whatever we hear here, any spiritual teachings, and see what rings true in our being and keep that and let the rest go, And our beliefs evolve, religions evolve. As seekers of truth, we need to allow for that. If you think about what you believed as a child, I'm certain that your views have changed quite a bit, right, since you were a child. For example, years ago, people thought the earth was flat. That's what they were told, and they believed it with blind faith. And most people never sailed out to the edge of the horizon to find out for themselves. But thank goodness somebody doubted that belief and decided, I want to know for myself if the earth is flat, right? They checked it out for themselves and discovered, actually, that's not true. So with all the spiritual teachings we receive, we should take what rings true to our heart and soul and let the rest go. Apply it, see if it works, and see if it changes our lives. And the unity movement gives us that freedom. It doesn't have the dogma. That says we have to believe this. It honors that we have the divine in us, that we have our own inner spiritual compass that we can follow. So I have a story about the time I invited my dad, a very strict, lifelong Catholic, practicing Catholic, to come see me perform and share music at a Unity church, a place that he had never been. I was going to be performing at the Unity of Gaithersburg. It's in Maryland, near Washington, D.C. I think it was around 1999. And so I invited Dad to drive down because he lived up, not that far away in Wilkesboro, Pennsylvania. And Dad was, at first pretty skeptical. He was very unsure about this unity movement, and tradition. And I think he was worried that at best it was not his thing, and at worst it was maybe a cult, So, but he loved me, and so he came. And that Sunday I was doing all the music, but the minister of Gaithersburg was giving the talk. And the talk, fortunately, actually happened to be a review of unity principles. And at the end of the talk, after the applause, the minister welcomed the new people and asked if any of the new folks would like to say hello. Well, my dad stood up, and he's this towering 6'3" figure, kind of John Wayne looking guy. And they handed him the microphone, and I must admit, I held my breath. What was he going to say? So he spoke into the mic and he said, I was unsure about coming here today, but being as my daughter was performing the music, I came. And all I can say is, it feels really great being here, and I agree with everything you've said today. I breathed such a sigh of relief. But, more than that, I was so moved by how moved my dad was. He'd been a lifelong accountant, and after the service, he was delighted at how many people came up to my CD table and bought CDs. I let him handle the money, which was a lot of fun for him. But what he loved the most was everyone wanted to hug him. Everyone. And I am absolutely sure he's never had that many hugs in one day, not even close. And he hugged them back, and that afternoon, as we drove together back up to Pennsylvania, he couldn't stop telling me what a great experience it was. Wow, it's making my heart, and when we were on that drive, he was lit up with spirit, and when we got up to my uncle's, we were going to see my aunt and uncle. My dad tried to tell my very Catholic aunt and uncle about the experience and how great it was, and they weren't so sure. But it was great to hear Dad wholeheartedly testifying. It was truly, truly wonderful. It was is that my dad was blown away by the love that unity is, by the love. I'm feeling it right now. So probably the most core belief in unity is that the primary goal of our lives, of each one of us, is to reach the consciousness level of Jesus, of the Christ within, of the indwelling presence. And, there is the core belief that we have a divine heritage. And when we become conscious of our divine heritage and we move towards it, we become healthier, we become happier, and more prosperous. Unity has a big focus on health and healing. And that can be a whole nother talk. That can be a whole series of talks. But they have a big focus on health and healing and how our thoughts held in mind bring health and healing. I want to give a talk on Myrtle Fillmore another time. Today I'm talking more on Charles. But briefly, she had a life-changing experience when she heard a talk by a metaphysician, E.B. Weeks. And E.B. Weeks was talking about her capacity to heal herself through her thoughts and her beliefs. She'd been pretty sickly most of her life. She had tuberculosis, and she'd been told, she probably wouldn't live long. And what she got from his talk was, I am a child of God, and I do not inherit sickness. And she took that to heart. And let me just read you a little bit of something she wrote soon after. She wrote, all of us sooner or later come to the place in our development where we're no longer satisfied to go on living the old life without the knowledge of our oneness with God, the source of our being. And she went on to say, this held my mind above negation, and I began to claim my birthright and to act as though I believed myself a child of God, filled with his life. I gained and I healed, and others saw the change and asked me to share it, and I did, and they were healed. And so she, started sharing this healing. She was lit. And she talks about how she applied the teaching, those essential teachings from Jesus. Be transformed by the renewal of your mind. So much of unity is about the renewal of your mind. We affirm and we deny, and we become so aware, so mindful of the content of our mind and the thoughts we hold in mind repetitively, right? She also loved that teaching from Proverbs. As he thinketh in his heart, so is he. As she thinketh in her heart, so is she. She blessed her body until it manifested the innate health of spirit. And, people noticed the change in her. They noticed that she was lit with consciousness, and they wanted what she had found. And she said, these wonderful laws will work for you too when you apply them diligently with faith. So in closing, there's so much more to share about unity. This talk at one point was 37 pages, and I kept editing down. And of course, at our meeting after service, I'm going to share quite a bit more. But I hope, I've given you at least a review, and maybe for some of you, I've given you something new and piqued your interest in learning more. It's so fascinating to study the people that Charles Fillmore studied, the mentalists and the philosophers and the metaphysicians from that time. They were kind of way ahead of their time. So I'm really happy we're going to welcome new members in our meeting after service, and I'm really interested in your stories. I want to know what brought you to unity. So let us give thanks. Let us give thanks for the teachers and the teachings and the movements that remind us of our innate divine nature, our innate goodness, our innate godness. And let us remember how powerful our minds are. Our minds and our feeling bodies are to create our health, our wealth, our peace, and our reality. May the energy of love and may the recognition of our oneness, the truth of our oneness, may it awaken in each one of us. May it awaken around the world. I actually feel like in all this that's going on, that can be the outcome. That humanity awakens to our oneness, and that wars cease, and that humanity unites, and that we create heaven on earth. That is truly possible, that I know in my heart is possible. May it be, and so it is. Amen. Thank you all. Thank you.
Oh, Kathy, that was so powerful. Thank you.